impact. So for purposes of today, this is pretty oversimplified, but I think this metaphor of the smoke alarm and the watchtower is really one of the best things that I've found in being able to conceptualize this. So this metaphor is not mine. This comes from the work of Bessel van der Kolk, who wrote a fantastic book called The Body Keeps the Score. He's written multiple books, but that's the one that this is from, and this is it's about the impact of trauma on our bodies and our brains. So for purposes of today, I want us to think about our brains having two parts, the emotional part of the brain, which is in the back, and the rational part of the brain, which is in the front. The emotional part of our brain is like the smoke alarm or the smoke detector in our brain. It is designed to monitor the environment for perceived threats and then to alert us via that fight or flight response, via that, physiological heightening, the quickening of the breath, and the sense of urgency overall that we feel when we perceive a threat. So it's like the smoke alarm. So it goes off, it detects a threat, and then or a potential threat. I should say that this part of the brain acts really quickly, but it's not super well refined. It's not super precise. So it generalizes out of necessity. So it can also overgeneralize and it can misinterpret something, which is good in the short term, right? I would rather this part of my brain overgeneralize and let me know that a threat might be there versus miss something big. But so the emotional part of the brain goes on when it detects a threat, smoke alarm goes off in our brain. Then the rational part of our brain, the prefrontal cortex, is sort of like a watchtower. So it examines the environment for the threat that it was alerted to by the emotional part of the brain, and decides, first of all, is it a real threat or is it sort of a false alarm? So, thinking about it in our home, when the smoke alarm goes off, is it because there really is a fire, or is it because somebody got toast stuck in the toaster? So it's the one that's more rationally, logically slowing down a little bit and being a little more fine-tuned to decide what the threat is and then identify a plan of action and activate that plan. So if there really is a fire, you're going to call 911. If it's just smoke from the toaster, you do the thing. You open the windows, you throw the toast out, you take out the trash that has the smoky toast in it, and then you wait an hour or two and everything is fine. That's what's going on in our brains for any threat that we perceive. That's how we're designed to work. Once that happens, once the rational part of the brain decides what the level of the threat, makes a plan of action, we execute that plan, then the smoke alarm can go back off and continue its monitoring function. And so our brain, that's pretty amazing stuff, right? We're designed to be able to manage stress in that way. And most of the time, that works pretty well. In daily life, that balance between the emotional and the rational part of the brain is what allows us to get through our days without even really having to think about this process happening. It's just happening. It's not intentional or conscious. It's just what's happening in the background. But in times of extreme or traumatic stress, like a lot of us are experiencing right now, it's as if the smoke alarm gets stuck in the on position. So that, thinking about, again, about the smoke alarm in your house, when that goes off and you can't figure out which one it is or where it is and it's just beeping, that is so distracting. And so it's as if when that happens in our brains, the emotional part of the brain gets stuck in the on position. The alarm is stuck in the on position, which overwhelms the brain and causes the rational part of our brain to sort of go offline or to be hijacked and not be able to do what it does. So now we just have this constant alert of threat without the same ability to scan the environment and more slowly and deliberately respond to or mitigate that threat. It's just this constant set of this constant experience of threat running through us. The rational part of our brain is the part that does concentration and sequencing, identifying an action, sequencing that action, and being able to work toward that goal. It also does memory and concentration and lots of other things to get through our day. So we need to just be at work or be in school and learn math or all the things that we need. That's where we're relying on the prefrontal cortex to be able to do those things. So when that part of our brain goes offline, because of this, the smoke alarm being stuck in the on position and overwhelming the rational part of the brain, all the brain's attention is now focused on just trying to shut off the alarm, which means we're not present in our day in the way that we usually are to learn math or to, type the report or to create the PowerPoint or whatever it is that we're spending our time doing. So it really, not only do we have this intense stress sort of circulating in our bodies, that sound of the smoke alarm going off like in our home, but we're also not, at the same time, not able to engage in the things that we need to be able to engage in. When that's happening, then that starts to manifest in our lives in other ways. So in terms of then how it impacts us emotionally, cognitive, behaviorally, right? It starts to impact all aspects of our functioning. So at the emotional level, I'm going to go through this quickly because I think most of you probably get this already, but at the emotional level, we sort of lose our ability in those moments when the smoke alarm is stuck in the on position. We sort of lose our ability to regulate our emotions. So we might feel the emotions that we do have much more intensely, right? And this can be any emotion: fear, sadness, anger, guilt or shame. Any of those reactions is going to feel sort of intense, and we might start to feel overwhelmed by those emotions. We might start to feel out of control because that balance in our brains that keeps our emotions regulated is just not there. In addition, though, to feeling too much, sometimes people just kind of then shut down and sort of feel too little, if you will, and to feel numb, to sort of check out, to disconnect from our emotions altogether as a way of coping with this. So in terms of thinking about other people, you can certainly see and notice the people who are feeling too much, right, who are overwhelmed by their emotions. That's usually pretty visible. People who are shutting down, who are disconnecting from their emotions and having a sort of numbing response, those people are harder to identify because they're not drawing attention to themselves in the way that they're doing. In terms of cognitive reactions, as I was just describing, the prefrontal cortex, the rational part of our brain that has now gone offline, is responsible for really important things. Our memory, our concentration, our ability to focus, all those things. And so when this is happening to us, we can feel confused. We can, our memory gets disrupted. We have difficulty concentrating. And then our thought processes, our self-talk, can just become ruminative and just become sort of chatter that becomes really negative and racing and feels out of control. This is really important because I think a lot of people can identify that their emotional reactions are in relationship to stress, but I think fewer people identify that their cognitive reactions are related to their stress, and so it becomes even more distressing when all of a sudden you're having problems with your short-term memory or your concentration or your ability to just sit and do your job. And so this is where people start to think there's something really wrong with them, right? Like they're going crazy, so to speak, or they're losing their mind. And because they're not connecting this particular set of reactions back to the stressor. Then also at the behavioral or physical level, as I said earlier, the stress hormones that are intended to circulate short term in order to heighten our reaction and prepare us to respond to a threat, when those are continuing to circulate over time, it really can take a toll on us in terms of a range of physical symptoms that, again, often people don't necessarily associate with the stress. Stress is a much more sort of insidious thing that impacts our physical well-being in ways that we don't notice often until something really starts to be wrong. Also disturbs our sleep, which I think is pretty obvious, and then the agitation or the difficulty relaxing, the just always feeling keyed up and not being able to get that to turn off, again, because we're sort of in chronic fight or flight mode. And then people also will go to really extreme lengths to avoid dealing with reminders of whatever it is that's stressing them, and that starts to change the way that people interact in the world. So not only is this going on in our brains, but we're also now having all these sets of reactions that we may or may not identify as being associated with the stress, which can cause an additional layer of distress. So Okay, there's defining the problem. So what are we going to do about it? So there's the frame that I want to use today is about responding versus reacting, and how do you resilience being the ability to thoughtfully respond versus just reacting to the stress in an out of control kind of way. So going back to the original image of the guy with the on the bicycle in the rain with the sort of broken umbrella, how can we sort of develop a range of umbrellas that we can use to protect ourselves from the rain in a better way? We're not going to get rid of the rain. The rain's just going to come, or I guess in our case today, the snow's just going to come here in New York anyway. But we can develop increase our ability to respond to it when it does come. So the definition of resilience at a psychological level, so resilience has become quite a buzzword, and because it's an important concept, but it doesn't, unless we have a working definition to try to know what to do, it's not super useful. So the definition of resilience that I offer today is being able to stay in or quickly return to, which I think is more likely, to quickly return to a place of balance physiologically, emotionally, and mentally after we've been disrupted. So after we've been triggered, after that smoke alarm goes on and kind of disrupts the balance between the emotional and the rational part of our brain, how do we increase our ability to more quickly get back into balance so that the emotional brain and the rational brain, or the smoke alarm and the watch detector, are working the way they're supposed to work? So how can you increase your ability to keep that balance happening? So another way of saying this is maintaining the ability to respond versus react to a difficult situation. I'm going to say a little bit more about that. So reacting, we're also going to refer to as the red zone. So reacting is when your brain is in that fight or flight place. When you're in that, so when you're triggered, when the smoke alarm is sort of stuck on, right? When you're in that place, all the systems in our body are disturbed. Our immune system, our cardiovascular system, all the systems. And when we're in that place, we're acting from a place of perceived threat or deficit or disturbance. So we're really in survival mode, and we're doing what we need to do from a place of just trying to stay safe. That is not where it does not allow us access to all of our psychological and physical resources to be able to planfully respond. What we want to do is increase our ability to respond from a green zone place. And so again, the green zone is where the emotional and the rational part of our brain are in balance, and our body is in its resting state. It's restoring itself. It's refueling itself. And so we're acting from a much more grounded place of perceived safety. When we're in that place, now we can use the rational part of our brain to more consciously decide how we're going to react to a situation, or how we're going to respond to a situation from a place that allows us access to all of our internal resources to be able to do so. So when we get triggered into a red zone, which we are all going to do, how do we increase our ability to more quickly get back into a green zone? So I want us to think about this in terms of building up our resources, our psychological resources over time. And that means preparing and rehearsing. When we're under extreme stress, it is so much easier to activate an existing strategy that you already have than to try to develop one on the fly. This is super important because the rational part of our brain that learns new things, or that can develop a new strategy, when we're under extreme stress, that part of our brain isn't even working. So our chances of being able to learn a new coping skill when we're in the midst of extreme stress is almost zero. It just isn't going to work. And so what we need to do is thinking about day to day, how do we invest in long-term wellness for ourselves that results in us being able to do daily activities that are a preparation or a rehearsal for those stressful moments, which are hopefully fewer and far between, right, at the top of the pyramid, so that we can access those stress reduction strategies when we need them. So I'll probably say this 3 more times, but one of the big takeaways I'm hoping that you walk away with today is it doesn't matter what you pick, just pick something and start to do it regularly. Make it a part of your routine, make it something that is rehearsed to the point of being automatic, so that it then when you need it, your body and your brain already know how to do it, and you can much more easily recall it. So another way of saying this is that we develop psychological resources, including resilience and stress management, by having sustained and repeated experiences of them that actually turn into durable changes in our brains. I'm going to say a little bit more about that. But this is like riding a bicycle. You learn to do it by repeated experience that then turns it into something that's so automatic that you don't have to think about it. It becomes muscle memory. You get on the bike and your body knows what to do to keep itself in balance. You don't have to relearn that skill every time, right? So how do we sort of learn to ride a bicycle in terms of our stress management capabilities, our ability to maintain our resilience? And so just on the previous slide, I said that this is actually creating durable changes in our brains. So this idea, I tried to explain this to my 17-year-old last night. I'm going to see if I can do a better job with you today than I did with my 17-year-old last night. But the idea here is that what we rehearse is actually building connections in our brain. It's rewiring our brain so that the connections that we're making when we're rehearsing are strengthened, and those connections in our brains are more likely to stay and maintain themselves. So another sort of kitschy way of saying this is that our brain cells that fire together wire together. So anything that you're doing over time, repeatedly, you're strengthening a connection in your brain that then gets hardwired in. That hardwiring of experience, that hardwiring of repeated things that we're doing over and over means that our experiences are literally shaping our brains. What we attend to, what we focus on, what we ask our brain to focus on over and over, those experiences, whether they're thoughts or physical exercise or a mental rehearsal strategy of some sort, deep breathing, those experiences are literally becoming hardwired into our brain. So another sort of way of saying this less scientifically is that what you focus on is literally becoming a part of you. So briefly thinking about this, we'll talk more about this in a minute, but can you keep your attention on positive or enjoyable experiences that you're having? If you can hold your attention on those are going to be the connections that get hardwired versus getting preoccupied with the negative things. The more that you focus on the negative things, the more those get hardwired in, and the more then the next time a situation comes along, you're just automatically, because it's hardwired in, going to be more likely to focus on those negative experiences. So how do we do that? The good news is that there are different ways to do that, and we don't have to start, this is not a one-size-fits-all approach. So this graphic is intended to display that our thoughts and our emotions and our behaviors are all connected to each other. They all influence each other. And so in terms of building resilience, you can start from a place of working with your thoughts or your cognition. You can start from a place of working with your emotions, or you can start with a place of working with your behaviors. And regardless of where you start, it's going to have a positive impact on the others as well. And so some people are just really more comfortable in a cognitive, rational, thought-based place. That's great. There are strategies we can adopt around that that are also going to help with the emotion and the behaviors. And some people are more comfortable in the emotion-based place, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. The behavior place, I'm not going to spend as much time on that today, but I'm mostly talking about things that you can do physically, whether it's exercise or whether it's setting an alarm and getting up and moving around once an hour, getting outside and getting some fresh air, those kinds of behavior strategies. If you can build those in as habits, that's going to have an overall impact on your well-being and your ability to regulate yourself over time, which is what we're working toward. So in terms of emotion-based strategies, the goal of that category of things is to strengthen our muscle memory around being able to get back into balance when our brain gets out of balance. So this is our mental muscle, strengthening our mental muscle. Another way of thinking about it is habit formation around being able to get back into balance. It's also about improving, at the same time that we're doing that, we're strengthening our ability to regulate our emotions. We're strengthening that sort of emotion regulation muscle, if you will. The other thing that some of these emotion-based strategies do is train us to regulate our attention and to hold our focus on the things we want to hold our focus on. Again, super important because the things that we focus on are the things that get wired into our brain. And emotion-based strategies also allow us to notice, and then the next step is to accept the reactions that we are having, which allows us then to be able to do something about them. So it really increases our awareness of what's happening, when we're being triggered, what we're saying to ourselves, all those things, so that we're able then to manage them. So these are strategies like mindfulness, any kind of mindfulness practice, and there's some science around this of even 2 minutes a day of a mindfulness or meditation practice can really start to have a cumulative effect over time in terms of the functioning. Also, any related exercise in terms of deep muscle relaxation or deep breathing or progressive muscle relaxation. So, and there are a million of these available online, right? You can find it, you can find apps and podcasts and websites with all kinds of strategies or techniques in any of these categories. I put yoga in this category because it also has a component of mindfulness and breath work, but it could also fall in the behavior category, which makes the point that these are not mutually exclusive things. But I'm offering this as a framework to help think about it. And if you've heard me talk before, you've probably heard me tell the story, but one of the incidents in my own life that has become has made me a real believer in these emotion-based strategies and the importance of practicing over their time. It's actually a story that happened personally in my family. So we had spent a semester in Bhutan. So Bhutan is a very Buddhist kingdom that sits between the Tibetan part of China and India and Nepal. And my kids went to a school there in which they meditated 5 times a day, every day, just as a part of their school day, just like, you know, regular prayer in Catholic school or something. My son was 8 at the time, 2nd grade, I think he was in there, and he was not a fan of any of this. He was not a fan of the school or really, I think, even living there, and certainly not of this meditation stuff, but he had to do it because it was part of school. At the same time, my oldest daughter, who was 16 at the time, was sort of working as an assistant teacher in the school, in the same school. So she was teaching these strategies, learning them, and then teaching them alongside the teachers through this meditation practice. So for a whole semester, so 4 months or so, my kids were doing this 5 times a day at school. So then we're done in Bhutan and we're ready to transition back to the U.S. And in the process, we've planned this amazing 2 weeks in Thailand. So we're gonna take it slow. We're gonna have some time on the beach. We're gonna explore Thailand, and then we'll head back to the U.S. So we have a big hotel room on the beach in Phuket. We get to Phuket, we check into our hotel room, and we haven't been there 5 minutes till I hear this terrible crashing sound, crashing glass. I don't know what's happening. I just hear shattering glass, and my son comes running into where I am saying, "Mom, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry." I have no idea what's happening still, but when my 8-year-old is apologizing and there's broken glass, it's not going to be good, right? And then my daughter comes in and she looks at him and she yells, "Trey, your leg." And so then we both look down, and he hadn't noticed, and I hadn't noticed yet. But I don't want to be graphic or triggering, but let's just say that he was wounded so badly that in that moment I thought maybe we might lose him. It was a really severe cut on his leg. And so the minute he saw that, he went from being apologizing for whatever the crashing glass was to being hysterical. What had happened is he had somehow run through the sliding glass door with the door closed, and it had shattered, and it had cut him. So he immediately gets hysterical, full on red zone, fight or flight reaction. I also get hysterical. The whole room becomes hysterical. All of us are hysterical. I'm trying to think what to do in a hotel room. I don't know how to call 911 in Thailand, or even how to get help. And so, but we lay him down. We're trying to like use some sort of tourniquet thing to stop the bleeding. And my daughter in that moment had the presence of mind to say to my son, Trey, do your brain brushing. And brain brushing is one of the meditation techniques that he'd been doing 5 times a day for 4 months. And so in the middle of this totally chaotic scene where all of us are triggered, all of us are in a red zone place, she said, Trey, do your brain brushing. And I watched my little guy just take a deep breath, breathe out, close his eyes, and for like, I don't know, 30 seconds, 45 seconds, something like that, he was completely calm. He was doing this technique. And that moment of him being calm allowed me to take a deep breath enough to try to actually then let the rational part of my brain go back online so that I could figure out, what do we do? How are we going to find help? How do we get emergency help right now? And so it had a positive impact on the whole room there for it bought me enough time to try to, to respond instead of react. Now, once that 45 seconds was up, he went back to being hysterical, and he was hysterical the whole rest of the way, including the taxi ride to the emergency room, which is what we ended up doing. But the point of my story is that he was so rehearsed in that strategy of brain brushing that when my daughter said it to him in that moment of being completely in that full-on panic red zone place, he was able to access it and do it just almost automatically. Like, she said the word and it cued the behavior from him. Now, but what would not have happened is she would not have been able to teach him that strategy in the moment, right? The part of your brain that learns new stuff is not online when you're hysterical and your leg is cut and everyone around you thinks you're about to die. So it's the rehearsal over time and the practice, even when you feel like you don't need it, that allows you to be able to then have that muscle memory to do it when you really do need it in a time of extreme stress. So again, all of these, though, are about increasing our ability to get back into the green zone when we've been triggered into the red zone. And also the other key to these strategies is that they strengthen our ability to regulate our attention. And regulating our attention allows us to focus on what we want to focus on and not just be controlled by whatever comes at us, right? We're able to manage what we attend to versus everything just coming at us and us being at the mercy of all of that stuff. On the other hand, not on the other hand, but there are also cognitive-based strategies that we can use. And cognitive-based strategies are those that work with our thought processes or our self-talk, the chatter that goes on in our heads that sometimes we don't even notice. It's sort of like a tape recorder playing in the background. And the reason that working with our thoughts is important, though there are several, but one of them is that, that fight or flight reaction that we have of being triggered into the red zone, if that is left to its own devices, that reaction only lasts some number of seconds that I'm not going to get right. I think it might be 90, something like that. Like the natural sort of lifespan of that fight or flight reaction is not very long. What keeps it going is our thoughts. Our thoughts are the fuel for that flight or fight system. So when we start saying like, oh my God, I can't do this, this is so bad, I'm so overwhelmed, this is never going to work, I can't believe I just did that, I can't believe this is happening to me. All of that negative chatter is the fuel that then keeps that fight or flight response on. So it keeps us from being able to get back to the place where we can be in the green zone and respond more thoughtfully. So we want to work with and develop skills for managing our own self-talk so that we are not unintentionally keeping ourselves in a red zone when we don't need to be. This is really important because our brains have something called a negativity bias. I'm going to skip forward and talk about that, and then I'm going to come back to this slide. So we are wired for survival, which means we are wired to scan our environment for bad news and to focus on that bad news at the expense of focusing on good news. From a survival perspective, that makes sense. But from a well-being and resilience over time perspective, it doesn't turn out to be particularly useful. So our brains scan for bad news, and then that is what we focus on, and just sort of naturally. Now, all of us are wired this way, some of us more so than others in terms of, just our natural born disposition or experiences that we've had over time have caused, have reinforced for us the tendency to focus on the bad over the good. But just naturally, all of us do this. So we fast track negative experiences into our memory. Again, from an evolutionary perspective, that makes sense. But then what happens is we become sensitized to focusing on the bad, which just becomes a vicious cycle. So that's something that we have to combat in order to really be able to hold our attention on the positive, or to focus on what we want to be focusing on, what we want more of in our brains. Another way of saying this that I like a lot is from an author called Rick Hanson, who wrote a book that's just called Resilient, which is kind of summarizes a lot of the good brain science about a lot of aspects of being resilient into one really well-written book. But he says that our brains are Velcro for bad experiences and Teflon for good experiences. So we're wired to grab onto and hold on to the and hold on to the bad experiences, and just the good ones sometimes just kind of slide away without us even noticing that it happens. So we have our work cut out for us in terms of being able to work with our company. But strategies here are around focusing on our self-talk and noticing it, just sort of tuning in and listening to the tape recorder in our heads, which can be done through some of the emotion-based strategies as well. So again, these aren't mutually exclusive categories. But then thinking about replacing automatic thoughts that are negative with things that are more neutral or more realistic or more helpful thoughts. This is not a just think positively and everything will be okay speech. That's not what I'm getting at here. But what I'm getting at is tuning into the bigger picture of things and seeing the positive aspects or the neutral aspects of a situation and not just the negative ones. I'm going to tell you another really super brief story about from my own life, but as I mentioned, I was explaining some of this stuff to my 17-year-old last night, so we're in the middle of the college application process, and early decision school notifications are going to be coming out probably this week. So there's a heightened sense of heightened stress in my home right now, and my daughter was really focused on this last night, and what I ended up doing is making a jar with her name on it, all colored nice and pretty, as artsy as I can be, and said every time that when you say something really negative, every time that you can then come back to me and say something that's more neutral or more positive or more realistic, you can have a quarter in the jar. She lobbied for $1, but I don't know that I can afford that. So we now have a quarter jar sitting on our fireplace mantle. But the intent of my on-the-fly intervention there is to help her identify when she's saying those negative things. So it's become, she's so overwhelmed that this is just coming out of her all the time, just this flood of stressful things she's experiencing. And so just by knowing that that quarter jar is there, I think it's going to help her start to attend to some of the stuff that she's doing that she doesn't even know what she's doing. Now we'll see. It's only been a day, or well, it's been like 12 hours. And then finally, there's a strategy of stress inoculation that I thought we might spend some time talking through. So this is a strategy of mental rehearsal and preparation for situations that you know are going to be particularly stressful for you. Again, just like with the deep breathing or the meditation or the brain brushing in my son's case, being able to prepare ahead of time for a situation allows you to be much better at handling when it does come up. So stress inoculation is like being inoculated against a virus. It's not going to prevent the virus it's not going to prevent you from being exposed to stress, but it is going to prepare you to mitigate its impact on you when you are exposed. So what we have here is a flowchart that my colleague Carla designed that kind of talks us through this. So I'm just going to spend the last few minutes here talking through this process with you. It is much likely to be much more effective if you write it down. There's something about writing things down and working through this process in a written way that becomes really powerful. So the first step over here in the corner is what we call name it to tame it. So of this big amorphous blob of stress that we're all experiencing, can you tease that apart and put a name to the different aspects of it that are stressing you out? What specifically are your stressors? What are the things, again, stressors are the things in the environment. What are the things in your environment that are causing you to feel stress right now? The more specific and concrete you can be, the better. So it's not just, in my daughter's case, I'm not just stressed and overwhelmed, but I'm concerned about the notification from my early decision school this week. I'm concerned that I'm not going to get it. I'm concerned about the number of applications that are due on January 1st. I'm concerned about making sure that these future recommendations get it. So you can take this big blob and start to break it down into its parts, right? That's called name entertainment. Even that starts to become a really helpful exercise. Because once you see the list, now you have something you can actually work with that you can do something about, okay? The second step is an appraisal step. It's looking at each of those things on the list and then noticing if you're really perceiving that thing on the list, that stressor, as a threat or as a challenge. And the reason that's important is because of this red zone, green zone idea. If you perceive something as a threat, you're more likely to respond to it from a red zone place of survival and in that reactive mode of just fighting off or fending against the threat, versus seeing it as a challenge, which is if you see it as a challenge, you're more likely to be able to respond to it from a green zone place of tackling the challenge head on versus just fighting off the threat, right? So if any of the stressors you're experiencing as a threat, can you do some self-talk around that? Can you spend some time on it and think about it? What is the chatter in your head about this thing? Is there anything about this that I can focus on with some more neutral or realistic thoughts to allow it to, the goal being, can you reframe it from perceiving it as a threat to perceiving it as a challenge? Also focusing on your strengths. How have you tackled a thing like this before? What coping strengths do you have, both internally, and then what are your supports? Who and what do you have in your environment that are resources that will help you tackle it? All of those things, all of those bullets are, again, toward the goal of reframing anything that feels threatening into something that you feel more empowered to take on as a challenge from a green zone response kind of place. Okay, next step is are each of the stressors on that list something that you have control over changing the outcome of or can influence directly or not? So now literally take your written down list and divide it into two categories. Make a list over here of the things that you do have some control over the outcome of or can directly impact, and those that you don't. This is important because working over and over again to change things that you cannot change is the proverbial beating of your head against the wall. It just creates more stress without actually having a positive impact on the outcome. So now you're going to have a list of the things that you do have some control over and the things that you don't. You can do something about both of them. Both of these lists now require something different of you. So for the things that you do not have control over, what that means is you don't have control over what's going on externally. But what you always do have control over is your own internal reaction to those things. So if you can't change it, how can you strengthen your ability to cope with it? So these are emotion-focused strategies like to tolerate or to cope. So these are distress tolerance strategies like the emotion-based strategies we went through earlier. Mindfulness, meditation, deep breathing, relaxation. This may even be in the short term, not in the long term, but in the short term, very short term, this may even just be something as simple as distraction, to distract yourself from something that you cannot avoid, but that causes you a lot of distress. So the joke in our office is about the power of a good cat video. I don't know if there's science around this, but you know, in the moment, if there's something that just feels intolerable, what can you do to distract yourself from it until the wave passes? So those are for the things you can't control. For the things that you do have some control over, now you can, and if you're in a green zone responding place where your body feels from a place of restoration and safety, now you can harness all your cognitive and emotional energy to tackle that problem head on, breaking it down into parts, using a brainstorming session for yourself or with the people around you to identify what your options are, work through a series of problem-solving steps to identify specifically what you want to do, and maybe that means you need to develop a new skill or find a new resource to deal with it. So that is stress inoculation in one graphic. I'm just going to go through each of the steps again, and then I'm going to stop, and then we'll just have a couple of minutes if anybody wants to put a question in the chat. So first step, write down what your stressors are. Be as specific and concrete as possible. Naming something gives you some power over it. Then looking at each thing and deciding how threatening it feels, and if there are aspects of the situation that cause you to feel threatened or that feel triggering or that you're approaching from a red zone reactive place, what can you do to work with your own self-talk on those things or your chatter in order to get it to reframe it for yourself so that you're approaching it from a green zone place where you're perceiving it as a challenge to be tackled instead of a threat to be survived. And then from that list, break it down one more time into things you do have control over and things you don't have control over. So the things you do have control over, what do you need to do to tackle that problem head on using a rational sort of problem-solving approach to working through it? For those that you don't have control over, what do you need to do to enhance your ability to cope or to manage or to tolerate the distress that it causes you? Because you do always have control over your own internal reactions. I believe that is the presentation. So, Rebecca, I think people can, do people have access to the chat function? Rebecca, I don't know if there you are.
Yeah, so people have access to the chat function, can put in questions. If you want a copy of the handouts, you can email idmh@newpulse.edu. And I'm going to put in a link to an evaluation. If you want to fill that out, that would be great. Amy, I am seeing some questions. Are you seeing them?
I'm not seeing any questions.
Okay. So one is somebody who works with teenagers and helping them being able to reframe problems. Do you have any more suggestions on that?
Yeah. So first of all, it's really important because this is the time when that part of their brain is fully in development. And so any strategy that you can teach them now will not just make the current situation with teenagers more tolerable, but will also start to build this in and build their ability to be resilient over time. In terms of specific strategies, what I learned last night was that I overwhelmed my daughter with with giving her lots of different ideas all at once. And so she was like, "Mom, what is it you're telling me?" So my suggestion is you pick one of these concepts and focus on it and focus on it over time. So with my daughter, I decided it was the negative self-talk piece. And so with the quarter jar, but kids also respond really well to meditation. I think or a mindfulness practice. I think the stress inoculation piece and the piece about what do you have control over, what do you not have control over. Like pick one of those concepts that you think might be particularly, or might land well. You can, with teenagers, sometimes you have to test them out, but find one that lands well and then dig in on that one in terms of giving them different ways to practice it and rehearse it over time. And give them a reason why, right? Give them a reason why you're telling them or you're suggesting this thing. I think that's the other big piece is if it starts to give them some control, if you can give them a little bit of education about why you're asking them to do that and not just you're telling them they're doing something wrong. I hope that's helpful.
And Amy, would you work through the stress inoculation piece in a session with a client?
You absolutely can do that. It might be too much for one session. You might want to break it down. It depends on how far along the person is in being able to, and what approach you've been using. So is the client somebody who can already identify their self-talk, right? Can they already make a list of the things that they're saying to themselves about a situation? So depending on, sort of how much psychological awareness or internal sort of self-awareness the person has, you may or may not be able to do it all in one session, but you can absolutely, I think it's helpful to do it in session and even ask them to, give them pieces of it as homework, 100%.
And Amy, do you have examples of your daily activities that you use to maintain wellness? I say that a bit sarcastically, actually.
I picked up that tone in your voice. This is 100% a do as I say, not as I do conversation that we're having. But I have set my Fitbit to tell me to get up every hour. I've really been noticing a big difference when I do that. I start to get everything just over the course of the day starts to build up. But if I just get up and, my house is like a circle, I can do a few laps through my house. I've also been really trying to do, to set my timer and do 5 minutes of deep breathing, basic mindfulness stuff with myself every morning. That has not yet become a habit. I tend to, when I get up, my mind is already racing with what I need to do that day. And so even carving out 5 minutes to sit and be feels like a big deal. And sometimes I don't do it, but I'm aware that when I do it, it really does give me a lot more mental clarity for the day. And I have started doing the first part of the stress inoculation process of just naming what it is that's stressing me out. And I find some relief in being able to just name it and hold on to it. So those are the 3 that I use. And I also often tell myself that I know some strategies, I just need to do them right.
Awesome. So I think that is all that I have in terms of questions that we've gotten.
Okay.
I put in again I got some requests for the email, so I put that in the chat. The link to the Qualtrics is in the chat, the survey evaluation for this training. And yeah, Amy, you want to close us out? Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. And the big takeaway is pick something that you think you are likely to do regularly and do it. Okay? And take good care of yourselves and each other. Thanks for coming, everyone.